Next, we will meet Chas Bountra. He is an innovation leader solving the world's biggest challenges. He spearheads the collaborative efforts across Oxford's science and technology departments, uniting the brightest minds to tackle some of humanity's greatest scientific and medical challenges. He is the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Innovation at Oxford, the world's top-ranked academic institution, and there he's currently collaborating with 30 pharmaceutical companies, 8 disease foundations, more than 100 academic labs worldwide to develop new drugs to address some of the world's most pressing health challenges. Among his awards and accomplishments, which include the Order of the British Empire, none may have been more impactful than his work to develop at speed a COVID-19 vaccine that was delivered to 3 billion people. Please welcome to our stage, Chas Bountra.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, man.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. How on earth do I follow that one? The one that's coming after me, Walter, I mean, he's one of the smartest people on the planet. So, Randy, you've sandwiched me between these two exceptional talks. So thank you for that, Randy, wherever you are. Where shall I start? I'm a big worrier. I worry about some of the big challenges that are facing patients and society and the planet. What I'll do in the next 20 minutes is share with you some of my worries, and I'm sure you worry about the same things. I'll share with you some of the things we've done in Oxford, and if there's time, I'll share with you some anecdotes at the end. So, 3 big worries, and I'd put them into 3 categories. My research is in healthcare, so I worry a lot about that. I can talk for hours on that, but I won't. I'm desperately worried about the climate emergency, and I'm extremely worried about growing inequality. So let me just talk about healthcare. Now, I apologize, some of the figures I'm going to give are UK, but in the UK, our population is 67 million. So we're about 1/5 of the size of the US. So in the UK, in the next 12 months, 350,000 people will get diagnosed with cancer. That's 1,000 people every day. That's 1 person every 90 seconds. And half of us in this room during our lifetime will have a diagnosis of cancer. We've been waging war on cancer for decades, since Kennedy started it. And there are still many cancers that, frankly, are death sentences. Ovarian cancer, esophageal cancer, pancreatic cancer, etc. I worry a hell of a lot about dementia, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. So in the UK, we have 850,000 people with dementia. In 2050, we will have 2.1 million people with dementia. All of us who live to more than 80, 1 in 6 of us will have dementia. And if you live to more than 90, more than 100, that incidence just goes up. We've had a couple of drugs launched in the last couple of years, but they only have marginal efficacy in the early stages. They certainly don't slow it down or prevent it. Mental health we've heard about today. It was a massive issue before the pandemic. It's become an even bigger issue post-pandemic. The incidence of anxiety, eating disorders, substance abuse, alcohol abuse is literally just shooting up. It's estimated that 20% of us during our lifetime will have some sort of depressive episode. Husseini Manji, he used to work at the NIH and then went to J&J. He now has a position in Oxford. He sent me some figures over the weekend. In the US, there are 45,000 suicides every year. In Europe, there's 93,000 suicides every year. These are staggering figures. Aging societies, we've got them all over the world. In the next 20 years, there's going to be a doubling in the number of pensioners with diabetes, and there's going to be a tripling in the number of pensioners with cancer. We're becoming resistant to existing antibiotics. Across the world, 1 million people a year are dying because they are resistant to existing antibiotics. Can you imagine going into a hospital and you get a minor infection and you don't come out? That's what's happening. And it's not just happening in India or Africa and South America. It's happening in Europe and it's happening in North America. We need a new generation of antibiotics. Rare diseases. We call them rare diseases because there's not many patients with these diseases, but altogether there are 7,000 rare diseases. If you add up all the patients, it's more than 350 million patients. 30% of those kids do not reach the age of 5. It can take 6 to 8 years to get a diagnosis, and 95% of them have no treatment. Can you imagine being a parent of a child with a rare disease and there is no treatment? These are the challenges that are facing us. The climate emergency is a magnitude bigger. We heard a brilliant talk from Ken and Christine earlier on, and they shared some of their statistics. And we've all seen what's happened in the past few years. The fires in Australia, in Canada, in California, in Brazil, the flooding in New York or New Orleans or London or Germany. Last January, January 24, my climate colleagues were telling me that January 25 was going to be cooler than January 24. It turned out January 25 is the hottest January on record. This is not something that we need a solution for in 50 years or 100 years. If we don't come up with a solution pretty quick, it's going to be a disaster. These changes are irreversible. And Christine and Ken touched on it beautifully. Pollution across the planet, it's not just breathing air in Delhi is a nightmare. It's not just pollution in the air. It's pollution in land and pollution in sea. We are messing up our planet, and these changes are irreversible. As a consequence of these climate changes, in the next few decades, we're going to see migration on a scale we've not seen before. It's not surprising if you cannot provide shelter, energy, security, food, water for your family, you will move. And that's what's going to happen. So big challenges. Inequality. You know, Oxford is a tiny town. But if you live in an affluent part of Oxford or a poor part of Oxford, there's a difference in life expectancy of more than a decade. If you look at inequality within a country or inequality across the planet, it's even greater. And inequality is always a bad thing. So we have big challenges: healthcare, climate emergency, inequality. So what have we been doing about it? So I'll share with you 3 stories, things that we've done in Oxford. So I used to work at GlaxoSmithKline, and one of the reasons I left GlaxoSmithKline was because I was frustrated when I looked across the pharmaceutical industry. Most pharma companies were working on the same disease, they were working on the same targets or ideas, and they were doing all of this in parallel, in secret. So you could have 20 companies working on Alzheimer's on exactly the same idea. And they all work on the same idea because they all read the same literature, they go to the same conferences, and they talk to the same opinion leaders. But the problem is that most of the ideas that we work on in the lab, when we take them into the clinic, and I think Ed touched on it this morning, The failure rate is more than 90%. I've heard figures as high as 95%. So most of our ideas, when we take them into the clinic after 7, 8, 9 years, they fail. So you can imagine if one company fails, the other 19 companies doing exactly the same are going to fail as well. It's a horrendous waste of money and resources and time when we desperately need new medicines. So when I moved back to Oxford in 2008, I decided I was only going to work on completely novel ideas. I wasn't going to do anything that there was already 100 publications and there's already 20 companies working on it. I wanted to open up new areas of biology. So I worked on completely novel ideas or novel genes. And for those genes, what we did was we purified the human protein. And I don't care about rats and mice because I don't think they predict what happens in humans. I was only focused on human proteins. We worked out the structure of those proteins. We developed assays for those proteins. We generated small molecule inhibitors for those proteins. And we generated antibodies for those proteins. These tools, what I did was I said, right, I'm going to share them with the world. So that we gave them away to anybody who wanted them in academia, anybody in biotech, and anybody in pharma. As a consequence, we ended up collaborating with more than 300 academic labs all over the world. And academics, as you know, all they care about is publications. So if they get a new tool, they will put it into their assay, they'll get a cool publication, and that's good for their next grant, etc. This was a way of crowdsourcing science. But many of the tools that we gave away to companies, as a consequence, some of them terminated some of their existing programs, and they started new programs based on our tools. And some of our academic colleagues, using our new tools and some of the data they generated, they started new companies. So by sharing these novel tools with the world, we accelerated innovation, we accelerated translation, we accelerated proprietary programs, and we accelerated the creation of new enterprises. That was the impact of open science. And again, Ed touched on what he was doing around open science this morning with his reagents. So that's one example. The second story is in the pandemic. So cast your mind back 5 years. So in the UK, at the start of the pandemic, our roads were empty, the department stores were empty, the stations were empty, the airports were empty, everybody was working from home, the hospitals were full. Those were the only things that were full. Every evening on the news, we were watching doctors and nurses cry because tens of people were dying in their hospitals every day. We had no vaccine, we had no treatment whatsoever for COVID-19. And what my colleagues did, so John Bell, who was the Regius Professor of Medicine, an absolutely brilliant man. If ever you meet him, please go and shake his hand. He is absolutely phenomenal. He's now the president of the Ellison Institute in Oxford. Louise Richardson, who was the Vice Chancellor at the time, again a visionary lady, now the president of the Carnegie Foundation in New York. And then, of course, Adrian Hill, Sarah Gilbert, and Andrew Pollard, absolute geniuses at what they did in the pandemic. So what these colleagues did was they partnered with industry, AstraZeneca. They partnered with the UK government, UK regulators, and funders like Wellcome and Gates. And they partnered with the Serum Research Institute in India. And they worked together and had a shared vision. We're going to generate a vaccine for COVID-19 as quickly as possible. We don't want to make any money out of it. We're going to give this vaccine away at cost price, so the cost of manufacture plus the cost of distribution. And together, they generated a vaccine in 9 months, something that would normally take 9 years. That vaccine we pushed into 3.5 billion arms, and we helped the world out of a pandemic. That vaccine saved more than 6 That vaccine saved more than 6.5 million lives across the planet. It saved more lives than either the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine. This is the power of working together and having a shared vision and not worrying about commercial agendas, but just pooling resources and focusing on the end goal. The third example was, again in the pandemic, my two genius friends, Martin Landry and Peter Horby. What they did was they said, are there any existing drugs that have any efficacy in treating COVID-19? So the drugs that are already out there for rheumatoid arthritis or asthma or whatever, do any of them have any benefit in COVID-19? So what they did was they used the resources in the UK inside the NHS, the National Health Service. So they worked with lots of clinicians across the UK, lots of hospitals. Of course, we had thousands of COVID patients. And they took some of these existing drugs and rapidly tested them. Literally, in weeks, they tested them in thousands of patients to see if they had any efficacy. And the first thing they looked at was that hydroxychloroquine, the anti-malaria drug, had absolutely no efficacy, despite what the current resident in the White House used to say. And then dexamethasone, this cheap generic anti-inflammatory that's found in every pharmacy store in the world, that had remarkable efficacy. That worked, and that saved more than 1 million lives across the planet. So 3 stories of things we've done in Oxford. I was talking last night to Brad. I don't know if Brad is here. Brad, are you here? Where are you? I can't see him. Anyway, Brad said to me last night, he said, Chas, why do you do this? And I shared with him 3 anecdotes, and I'll share those with you now. About 20 years ago, I was working at GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, and I went to visit a care home. And in this care home were lots of patients with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. And I saw this one patient in a side room. He was in his late 60s, early 70s, and he was just staring at the wall. He didn't even acknowledge me. His daughter was sitting in the room with him. So I spoke to his daughter for about 5 minutes. And just as I was leaving, she grabbed my hand and said, please help my father. And I thought to myself, it's too late for your father. The tragedy is, ladies and gentlemen, if that happened to me today, I would say exactly the same thing. I am sad that we have not made more progress in the past 20 years. Second anecdote. About 10 years ago, a lady who lives in Bath, so Bath is about 60 miles from Oxford, came to visit me, and her daughter had a rare GI stromal tumor. So the daughter didn't come, the mother came. Her daughter's physician lived in Cambridge, so he also came. And so the two of them were sitting in my office, and the mother started to cry. She was crying because there was no treatment for her daughter, and she had no hope, and frankly, she was just watching her daughter die. I said to the mother, I said, how is your daughter doing? She said, my daughter is 21 years old, and they've just removed the whole of her stomach. At the time, my daughter was 21, and I thought to myself, how on earth does any parent cope with that? A couple of years later, on a Sunday afternoon, she sent me an email saying, my beautiful, precious daughter has just died. I have to say, for several weeks, I felt quite awful, because she came, she asked for help, and we couldn't deliver. The third story was about 5 years ago, on a Sunday morning. I was giving a public lecture in Oxford, And at the end of this lecture, this lady came to me and she said, "Professor Bountra, my daughter died with a brain tumor last year. If you want to study her brain, this is where you can get it from." And she handed me a slip of paper, and on this paper was her daughter's name, her date of birth, the day she died, and where her brain is stored. My wife came to pick me up after that, because it was Sunday lunchtime. And I said to my wife, I've just had a complete stranger come up to me and offer me the brain of her dead daughter. The lesson from this is parents, relatives, loved ones, as well as patients, they are desperate. And they're looking to people like us for hope and solutions and new treatments and help. So, ladies and gentlemen, to sum up, across the planet, we are facing enormous challenges. No one individual, no one institution, no one organization, no one country can tackle these problems on their own. We have to open our arms and embrace each other and pool our resources, pool our infrastructure, pool our expertise, and get scale and get urgency. It's the only way. Thank you very much.
Professor Bountra, would you wait, and let me ask you just one question, going back deeper into the beginning of your conversation here. You talked about the climate crisis, which you see obviously as clearly as an existential threat to humanity. There is obviously no single so-called silver bullet that will make the climate challenge go away. Yeah. But if you had to identify one or two things that we could do now to ameliorate the damage that we're doing to the climate now, what would those one or two things be?
I think, unfortunately, Tyler, we don't have time just to do one or two things. I think we have to throw the kitchen sink at it. We need green energy, whatever form we can get, and we need to try everything. We need carbon capture, we need biodiversity, we need food, we need water production, we need to tackle pollution, we need to do all of these things. No one thing is going to do it on its own. We've got to tackle them all. And this is why we've got to work together. In the COVID pandemic, which again was a crisis, many colleagues said, we're never going to get a vaccine for COVID-19. But it turned out we were lucky and we managed to get quite a few. And that was luck. And so I think, when you're facing a crisis like this, we literally have to throw everything at it.
And you can't count on luck.
No.
Professor Bountra, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.